So we do this once or twice a year, our question and answer Sunday. But before we get into that, I just want to honor that today is Veterans Day. So I thought I'd ask if anyone here is a veteran of the military service, would you stand up? Okay, stay up. Please stay standing. Now, anyone who is the parent of a veteran, please stand up. Anyone here who's a parent of a veteran? Okay. And anyone whose father or mother was a veteran or is a veteran, stand up. Okay. So we see how many people are standing. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you. All of that. Probably half or more of the people here, are in the immediate family of a veteran, which really says something. We just had an election you may have heard about. There was something in the news about it. But once again, we had an election, and it didn't require an armed insurrection. It didn't require the troops be put in the streets, except in Florida. And and we kind of take that for granted in this country, but it really is quite something that we can have that kind of a democratic moment that we don't all feel threatened by, is this going to cost us our lives to do this? And that's very special. And it ties into Veterans Day because the reason we have the freedoms we have are because they were defended. And they've been defended over the couple of hundred years plus that we've been a nation, and before that even. I was reading a interesting thing about the Founding Fathers. And I know there were founding mothers too, but back in the day, it was a different way things were presented. But it was just that, the interesting thing was that those people that we call the Founding Fathers were a very small slice of who lived here then. And probably the majority of people that lived in what were then the colonies had no interest in independence. So it was sort of a small sliver that sort of got that thing going, and it at great expense. Many of them, their lives were threatened. Once they came to Philadelphia to begin to do that process, in some cases their property was seized back in their home colony and things like that. And it was a very dangerous thing to do. And so it took a tremendous amount of courage. And freedom never comes without a price, without responsibility. So if you look back over the history of our nation, which, we're probably in the top 2 or 3 freest countries on earth. We used to be the number 1, but it's great that freedom is spreading, but it comes at a cost, and sometimes we forget that. We take it for granted. So thanks to all those you who have served, who continue to serve, and let's just not forget that. That's all. Okay? So, the question and answer Sunday idea is that, there's sometimes I don't talk about stuff during the year or whatever. You have a burning question, or you want to try to embarrass me or something like that. And so this is an opportunity. And the way we do this is that there's 2 microphones. If you have a question you'd like to ask, just come up to one of the microphones. And, when I acknowledge you, you ask the question. And the folks that are on live stream, if you have a question you'd like to ask, and the question should bear something to do with the science of mind in your life, I think that would be good. I'd rather not get into, other things. But if you have a chat space in the on the page that you're watching on, and you can enter a text there and just say, what's the story, or whatever the question is. And we have Lane Taylor here, who has a laptop and can receive that question and pass it on to me. I'm going to ask the first question to get us rolling here. And it's, Dr. Jim, if you're such a great metaphysician, why do you have a cold? Because I've often said I don't get colds. And yesterday morning, Friday afternoon, I sort of had a cold. And I did a lot of inner exploration because we were scheduled to go to Paso Robles yesterday for this wine tasting festival that we had been scheduling, and we went. I couldn't taste anything, but just so to speak. Well, I could taste, but it was interesting because, as many of you know, I'm kind of into wine, and we were tasting. It was 45. They're called garagistas. They're very small producers. You're a garagista if you produce less than 1,500 cases a year, which is a really small amount. And some of these folks produce like 10 cases or 20 cases or 100 cases of wine. And so it's a very personal thing for them. But it was interesting. I noticed when I tasted the wine, I didn't have any nasal, I couldn't smell it. Couldn't get the bouquet. But my tongue could recognize all the characteristics that normally get kind of hidden with that. I could taste the acidity and the alcohol level and things like that. So it was kind of interesting. Not quite as enjoyable as it would have been. But why do I have a cold? Well, I have a cold because some kind of mental process that I have been going through in the last period of time led me to create some kind of a depression in my immune system. That ordinarily your immune system is, dealing with all the stuff that might invade you, and there's always stuff invading you, by the way. But normally your immune system is up to a point where it kind of, eradicates or expunges those kinds of viruses or germs or whatever it may be. And so we tend not to get sick necessarily because we're exposed to something in the air or something that we ingest, but because the immune system that would normally take care of that is depressed. That's normally what happens. So you'd say, well, why would my immune system be depressed? Well, again, there must have been a pattern of thinking and feeling that caused that to happen. Now, it's not necessarily I was thinking, I think I'll get a cold, because sometimes we tend to think that our thought patterns are linear and things, but really it's more about the atmosphere of what we think, the totality of your thoughts and feelings over a period of time. If you're thinking things that are largely negative or fear-based, you kind of get you can feel the depression in terms of a feeling, but also it can have a physical effect on those parts of your body that are susceptible to that kind of thing, which is most of your body is susceptible to how you're thinking and how you're feeling. I work with a couple of different people for prayer partners every week, and one of the things I've been feeling a little confused about certain things, not so much about anything in the present, but just thinking that I just feel like I'm entering a period of change, and I don't have anything specific to stick my finger on and saying this is what it's about. But it's happened enough in my life that I can begin to recognize it, and I've been in a sense of, gee, it would be nice to know what this is about, without necessarily getting any answers. So I suspect that kind of ruminating about that has probably had an effect on my my immune system, and I got a cold. Okay, so a cold takes what, 7 to 10 days. So I'm knowing this will be gone by tomorrow because I got the point. You see? And really, that's often what it's about, is when you learn the lesson that whatever it is trying to teach you. And really, if we look at illness as teacher, I think that's an important thing to do. What has this come about to remind me of in a sense of being out of balance? What if I look at it that way? And then if I get the point, I don't need to go through the whole process. You're able to just, when you're done with it, you're done with it. The other thing we have to look at, and I'll just share this, is, what are my beliefs about having a cold? Now, in the old days, when I used to get colds on a regular basis, I knew it was 7 to 10 days. That was just kind of the rule, so you'd go for 7, hopefully, and maybe 7 days. And you'd count down, it's 6 days, I better still be sniffling, because that would be unusual to have it go away sooner. And, the other beliefs we have, do we have an expectation that when the weather changes, maybe it must be the weather. If I were to go around and ask the average person on the street, why do you think I have a cold? They'd probably point to the weather, or you were in a draft, or maybe you got wet, and or all the things that we talk about as when we're little kids. My grandmother, close the window. There's a draft. You'll catch your death of cold. Why don't you go outside and play? She'd say 5 minutes later. I'm like, why, that should kill me if I do that. Or she said, you know, you get a little, in a rainstorm, you get a little wet. Oh, come inside, dry off real quick or you get a cold. Then you go swimming, you know, or take a bath. I just didn't get it. But, but, you know, I got sick like I was supposed to. And we bought the medicine before you got sick. Because you knew you were going to get sick. You know, you're going to have your it's cold and flu season. They remind you on TV in case you forget. Oh, it's cold and flu season. Damned if it isn't. I better go out and get the medication now, because who wants to go to the store when they don't feel well, right? But see, that creates a consciousness of expectation that that's the norm. And once you believe that that's the norm and that's what to be expected, if it doesn't happen to you, you go crazy. So sanity for each of us is that our lives unfold the way we think they should. Now, the interesting thing about becoming a metaphysician and getting over or going to a different expectation than getting 4 colds a year or whatever it is when you do get a cold, you got a whole different set of issues to deal with. Like, where'd this come from? Why do I have this? What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? You know? But that's not really it either so much. It's more about what have I been doing in relationship to myself and the world around me in such a way that it has led to this susceptibility to this particular issue, whether it's a viral, and you know, colds are normally viral infections, you know, scientifically, but that virus, the cold virus, is everywhere. You know, it's not like, oh, there's a cold virus in the room and it's going to get one of us. We all got the cold virus all the time, pretty much. It's just when we become susceptible, receptive is what we would say in a metaphysical term. Why did I become receptive to this? Is one question. But the real question is, what am I to learn from this? What's the message here? What's the meaning in this for me? And it may be different than if you had the same experience, what the meaning would be for you. You know. So I really recognize that I've been accepting that I'm confused, which really isn't true either, you see. And the danger of accepting that you're confused and believing you're confused is you tend to push away awareness if you believe you should be confused. Because awareness is the cure for confusion, right? And colds, Louise Hay, who has a lot of these mental equivalents, says one of the mental equivalents for having a cold is being in a state of confusion. So are we all now confused enough that I can move on to the next question? But really, the point is, the point I want to make before we close is, it's not a linear A to B connection. Each of us is in our own field of possibility, our own field of awareness and the beliefs we've accepted. So, you can pick up Louise Hay's books, You Can Heal Your Life, and in the back she has, for every ailment, she's got kind of what it means. Well, that's what it means for her. And it's probably it might be something you could look at and you can say, oh yeah, that kind of means, like a sore throat means there's something in your life you're having trouble swallowing. Well, that could make sense. There could be a new idea, there could be a new idea. Maybe you don't like the way the last election went, so you're having trouble swallowing that fact, and you might notice you have a sore throat as a result. Well, that could manifest for you that way, or it could manifest in a different way. So her mental equivalents are kind of jumping off points to say, yeah, does that resonate with me, or no, I need to look at something else. But there are some general truths. Our bodies are responsive primarily to our emotional state. So when you have a dis-ease in your body or some kind of a function that's not working, there's usually some kind of an emotional connection of something you have a concern, a worry, a fear, or even a dread about that's showing up in that physical manifestation. Okay? So does anybody else have a question? Or should I just ask myself questions all day? Anybody? Anybody online? Yes, Maddie, would you use the mic so we can beam you out all over the planet?
I have a question about how destiny informs cause and effect.
Okay. What is the question?
How does it?
Oh, okay. The question, how does destiny inform cause and effect? And by destiny, I'm assuming you're thinking of something like there's a plan that each of us kind of has that we're, okay. That's a good question, and it's something that comes up quite a bit in any exploration of kind of meaning of life kinds of questions. You know, or people will say, "Oh, I was destined to have this experience," or "You and I were destined to meet." Okay. The short answer from everything that I've come to understand is there's no such thing as destiny. What there is that we each are born with certain tendencies or proclivities or talents or desires. And so, you know, when you show up, you're to say you've just been born, okay? So your parents haven't really had a chance to get at you too much yet, right? And the world hasn't started kind of letting you know how you should think and feel. Okay, but you just show up. So if you just took that kind of raw material of that individual showing up, and you could somehow, you know, give that child all the abilities to live in the world without all the influence that goes with it, you know, the skills like language and that kind of stuff, without what goes with learning that, then you would get a kind of a pure sense of who that person is and what they would desire and what they would go toward and what they would stay away from. But that doesn't happen, so we're in this cocoon kind of a series of them. We're in the family, and then it goes out to the neighborhood, and it goes out to the school, and it goes out to, you know, all the different subcultures we're in, and there's a lot of influencing that goes on. So a lot of us, what we do, one of the things that we are born with as humans is a desire to affiliate. Maslow talks about this. We want to be accepted by other people. So we tend to adapt our own desires and our own drives to be accepted from the time we're very little. Which means that a lot of what I think I want isn't what I really want, it's what I've been conditioned to want. You know? That being said, destiny would imply that there's some kind of if not a whole roadmap for me to follow, there are at least points that I'm supposed to somehow get to that have been predetermined. My sense would be that that's not the case at all, that life, the universe, everything is unfolding from the now moment based upon the operation of the intelligence of everyone and everything involved. Now, you and I, as human beings, have the highest level of intelligence of anything we've discovered so far in the universe. So we are able to make changes pretty quickly, or make decisions and choices pretty quickly that may seem inconsistent to who we are. Whereas an animal like, you know, a dog or a cat or a fish, you know, they're not going to shock you too much by their life choices, right? But I think that what's happening is what your week as it unfolds, your month, your year, your life is unfolding out of a series of now moments that you are applying your consciousness to based upon both who you showed up here to be and all the influences you've had up to this point. And you literally can go in any direction, but you will tend to have a tendency to go in certain directions. You know? You know, that could bring up the whole, is there a person that you're destined to be with? Is there a soulmate, right? And what if that soulmate, like, lives in China, you know? Not near the coast, so it'd be hard for him to get out. Or a place like Cleveland, where you're unlikely to ever meet them, right? Well, I think, here's what I think. I think that if you look at the concept of oneness, which we believe in as the basic underlying principle of all things, that everything is one thing, then potentially every being is your soulmate. The question is, based on who you showed up as, that precious cosmic self that showed up, and all of the influences that you've accepted and adapted into through your life, who are you going to resonate with more strongly than other people? It's clear that there are people you resonate with and there are people that you don't, right? So it's not like we equally resonate with everybody, but who we resonate with really, you know, you can resonate with somebody almost anywhere you are, you know? It's kind of interesting. And, you know, we prove that culturally with serial relationships. You know, we still have the underlying belief, which I think is a myth, that you're destined to be with one person forever, or if you're not with one person forever, you're somehow a failure. But the reality is that we can be very happily in one relationship after another that can have deep closeness and meaning, which would sort of belie the idea of a single soulmate as being the only one for you. Ken Wilber talks about if there is destiny, it would be like there's a roadmap and we're all somehow following it, although we're not aware of it. But he says, no, he doesn't believe that. He believes we are actually creating the map as we go. It used to be back in the old days in Protestantism that it was believed that everything was predetermined, that your whole life, that there was no such thing as free will. In Calvinism and things like that, it was believed that everything that you do or did had been determined before you were born. You know, and the advantage of that was that you weren't really totally accountable for anything. You were kind of, and it was also impossible to be saved in that particular belief system. Didn't make a lot of sense, but that's kind of that was a very prominent belief system for a while. Now, our belief system is that we are ultimately in spiritual freedom, that we are always capable of making any choice that's available to make, but the reality is with our psychology, you'll tend to make a choice that's consistent with who you see yourself to be. You know? But occasionally, we do make significant departures from that pathway, and we're capable of doing that any time. If destiny was really what was guiding us, that ability would be very limited or non-existent. So I don't think there is any place any of us are supposed to end up or get to or be any specific person we're supposed to be with. I think that the ultimate realization of who and what we are to be would be to maximize your experience of being yourself, whatever that is. And that the universe will always provide you with whoever and whatever you need to do that. But part of the problem is many of us don't realize that who we are, so we never step out into the world in that individualistic, more positive way. We tend to try to fit in wherever we are, and we kind of limit ourselves down and decrease our choices. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. I don't know if it answered your question, but anybody else? Yes, Lena, would you come up to the mic?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. They're not particularly deep philosophical, but
oh, good.
Sometimes people are introduced. They're holding the high watch, or they're sitting over in the corner, and they seem to be in prayer or meditation. And I didn't really know what that is about. And
that's our woo-woo stuff.
Yeah. And then my other question is, what's the difference between the minister, ordained minister, staff minister, the different titles or the different designations?
Okay. All right. Well, the first question, people that like Reverend Maggie is our practitioner of the day, and she's in prayer treatment during the service, as you said, or appears to be. Well, you never do know an interiority of another person, right? But we trust that all is well. Well, what that's about is that, again, we believe that everything here is done in consciousness, and that both on the individual level and the collective level. So, within our teaching, it's very common to have people that are practitioners be in prayer treatment during services or meetings. When our board is meeting at the CSL level, there are people not necessarily in the same space but during that time that are sitting in prayer the whole time. Holding the high watch is one of the terms we use, and really we don't believe in holding thought. We believe in being in thought. But holding the high watch would simply be a reference to let me think the highest thoughts I can in relation to this situation. It might be if someone is ill, someone might say, I'll hold the high watch. That means I'm going to be in the highest consciousness I can attain for the benefit of that person during this period of time. And you know, if it is true that there is one mind and all minds think into it, then those thoughts do have effect. And we certainly have seen ample evidence of that through the years in terms of healings and things like that. So that's why we have a practitioner of the day who is in that consciousness. And it also benefits the practitioner of the day, in this case Reverend Maggie, because afterwards she'll be available to do prayer treatment for people who may have an issue that they would like to have someone pray. And what practitioners do is they just pray. That's all they do. You know, they do what we call affirmative prayer or spiritual mind treatment on the behalf of someone who has something they'd like to have healed in their life. As far as the way we structure our ministry in Centers for Spiritual Living, we don't ordain ministers when they finish their ministerial education. You don't become ordained until you've been in ministry for a while and it's become clear. The idea of ordination is a ministry for life. So when someone graduates from ministerial education, they're initially licensed once they have a ministry. So you have to graduate and then be affiliated with a center, or we have focus ministries and teaching chapters and things like that, to be licensed. And then there's a period of time where you're licensed and you work with a mentor and you're in a sponsorship program. And there's some things you need to do and basically show evidence that ministry is going to be your life. And then there's some time elements, and it varies in some respects. But basically, after somewhere between 2 and 10 years, you're eligible to be ordained. And then there's a panel interview and so forth. And then, you know, the ordination would happen then. So the reason we do that is the recognition is that some people, you know, they may get into ministry and find it's not for them and want to leave, and we prefer they not be ordained. You know, so you have some time to kind of get a sense of whether or not it's right for you and if it's a good fit. And staff minister is a designation that has nothing to do with, there can be staff ministers that are ordained, Reverend Maggie being one. And you have a senior minister position. We call it spiritual leader here, sometimes called pastor, sometimes senior minister, spiritual director. And then there can be an assistant. An assistant minister would be kind of an overall assistant, and then staff ministers usually have a specific ministry. Like Dr. Susan has two. She has the administrative ministry and the youth ministry, so she's considered a staff minister. It's just a way of kind of delineating. It's not really official. It's more of a structural kind of a thing, so we can understand it within the organization. Okay. Yes. Mary. Let me get a little more of this gin here.
When Dr. Ken Gordon was here, he mentioned about the possibility of moving New Thought into a more global-centric position. Has there been any more talk about that, or can you explain?
Oh, we talk about it all the time. Well, actually, Dr. Ken was just with a bunch of other New Thought folks. We have an organization, you may have heard of it, called AGNT, A-G-N-T. It's the Association for Global New Thought. And it was started by a number of different ministers from our denomination, from Unity, and from some others. And they just had a conference in Italy where they brought in religious leaders, secular leaders, educators, and so forth, 250 of them. And they dialogued for 4 days in Rome and Florence about how the New Thought philosophy can assist in organizations throughout the world in healing work and things like that. We do have within our organization, Centers for Spiritual Living, we have what's called global services, and they coordinate activities that are outside of North America. Outside the U.S. and Canada. And we are now in, I think it's like 35 countries. And there's lots of different, a lot of these are what we call seed groups, and that's a small group that might meet in someone's home somewhere. And they'll find global services, and global services will help them to get materials in the local language and books and CDs and things like that. Some centers have adopted seed groups, and they provide materials and so forth. We have one seed group in Ethiopia that is affiliated with our center up in Ukiah, California. And they've had visitations back and forth, and they've actually done a mutual live stream back and forth with the two groups and things like that. Nobody could understand anybody else, but it was, it was kind of neat. So what we find around the world is that there are some centers that exist, but mostly it's small groups that are meeting here and there. Russia, actually, in the Ukraine, not Russia, but the Ukraine, we now have 100 practitioners trained. And they're setting up ministerial education to train a couple of dozen ministers in the Ukraine. So there's quite a large work going on there, because we discovered after the Soviet Union collapsed that Science of Mind had been translated into Russian and was all over Russia. And our organization, nobody knew anything about it. And it actually came to light when I had a center in Baltimore in the early mid-90s, and a woman named Lena Samsonova would come to the center. And she was a Russian expat, and she had, a very heavy Russian accent. And she would come up to me and say, she says, with your permission, may I take your tapes and translate them into Russian? And I said, sure, And she started doing that, and she came in and I said, how many copies? She's making 300 copies a week. And there was this huge Russian community in northwest Baltimore, and they were all gathering and listening to Science of Mind talks because they used to read Science of Mind back in the 50s and 60s in Moscow. And all that was going on, and we had no idea about it. So the focus of global services, and if you go to the CSL.org website, you can see there's global services button, and you can see a lot of their programs and things like that. So there's quite a vibrant group. There's going to be a New Thought conference in London in May that many of our ministers are going over to participate in, and there have been conferences in Portugal and other places, and we're trying to set something up in South America, and so it is expanding, not as quickly as we would like, but it is expanding, and it's kind of a grassroots effort. Okay, so we have time for one more question. Yes, would you come up to the mic, please? Linda.
I do this with Dr. Jim often. I say, I know I want to say something to you, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Based on what you just said about getting the word out, as an elementary school teacher, I hold my children in the highest light, knowing that they're not broken, that they're perfect, whole, and complete. And yet, I see some dysfunction, or what was the word, less than skillful behavior and parenting. And my question is, how do I keep the Science of Mind, knowing they're perfect, whole, and complete, and we're all one, and help these children and our world get better when it's not quite working for them? Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Good question. Anybody know the answer to that? No. The answer would be in a phrase: I learned to see through appearances. I learned to see beyond appearances. Because what appearances are, what behavior is, we might say that's in the realm of facts, or we would call it the world of effect. You have cause and effect. So what we're all looking at and experiencing is effect, and effect is simply the reflection of the cause behind it. And if the cause behind it is limited in any way, then the effect or the expression is going to be limited. And the mistake we make is looking at the effect and saying, that's the reality. And it's not the reality. It's simply one possible consequence of the myriad ways that we could be using our minds. We have a powerful statement in metaphysics that says, I am not moved by appearances, therefore appearances move. Because the danger we get into and you crystallize it perfectly, is when we look at the world and we say, look at these idiots. What is the matter with these people? You know, and you know, it does. You will see all kinds of bad behavior. Maybe you've even done some. Anybody? No. Sorry. Maybe you've even done some things that were less than the highest and best you could have done in the moment as you've gone through your life. And the reality is that we're all works in progress. So how can I hold the high watch, in a sense, when I see that the effects that I'm observing are less than that? Well, it's not easy if you haven't done. You have to do your work. You have to do your spiritual practice. You have to get yourself into the habit of doing prayer, of doing meditation, of doing the kinds of things that enable you to do just that, to be fully present in the right way in the midst of things that are less than desirable or even chaotic. You know, for example, when as an elementary school teacher, I'm sure there are times when you walk in and things are a little chaotic, or there's something that people are really, really upset about that you know is no big deal, right? And in that moment, you're able to say, oh, that's okay, it's no big deal. So what if you could mirror that kind of consciousness in some of the other areas you're talking about, is to recognize that whenever we see human behavior that's destructive, it really isn't a big deal in the sense that there is a consciousness that's greater than that can observe it and perhaps have a positive effect on it. But when I say that the behavior is the reality, I accept for myself a limiting idea, and then I become less effective. I can't do a lot of good if I'm identifying with the behavior, if I'm sucked into the drama, as it were. So there's another saying we use: I am in this world, but not of it. And that literally is so when you're a consciousness that's vibrating at a higher level and you find yourself surrounded by people or around a lot of people that are vibrating at a lower level. You're in the world, you're seeing the effect of what's going on, but you know it's not your consciousness that's producing it. And that it's not about making people better or worse, it's about recognizing that some of us are more emotionally and spiritually mature than others. But that everyone is an expression of the divine who is in the process of self-discovery. And everyone is in their perfect place, right where they are, doing right what they're doing. It's just that we all have room for improvement. So can I become an agent for improvement, or am I going to be more likely an agent of judgment? Because simply identifying something as wrong doesn't really do any good. You may have noticed. Maybe you've been identified as wrong once or twice in your life, right? Your first tendency isn't, oh, I'll be better. You know, it's like, oh, crap. You know, or screw you, right? It doesn't necessarily make you open and receptive to change. I talked before about this thing I saw when my daughter Caitlin was in middle school and in swimming on the swim team. And the way the coach worked with the kids, you know, because a lot of, you know, if you're doing something wrong, coach would say, look, you're doing it wrong. You're doing this. You're not supposed to do this. Don't do this, right? But what the coach would say would be, stop this way. He would never show them what they were doing wrong. He would say, stop, do it this way. Bring your arm over. You see? And immediately he gets the right image into the kid's head. He gets their attention, breaks that chain of thought that's leading to the wrong behavior, and goes right into the right behavior. You know? Now, do you do that with yourself, or do you ridicule yourself a while before you start to get into the right side of things? You know, how do you coach yourself? How do you parent yourself? How do you talk to yourself? You know, most of us were raised in a culture that believes that you got your punishment coming, and that's got to come before you can do the correction. That's an Old Testament BS way of living. What's it produce? It produced the 20th century with more wars than we've ever seen in the history of the planet. People that need their punishment first. You know, that's a whole misunderstanding of the nature of God. God doesn't punish anybody, never has, never will. Why should you? So I'm relieving you of the need to punish anyone for anything or make them feel bad or make them feel embarrassed or make them feel ashamed. It doesn't do any good. Just say, stop, do it this way. And if you don't have any linear personal responsibility over what they do and they don't follow your instructions, you're relieved of any responsibility. If you're their teacher, if you're their parent, if you have an agreed upon responsibility, then maybe you follow through. If they say, screw you, you say, no, you can't say that because we have this agreement. But you don't have to go chasing people down the street that you don't know trying to correct their behavior. Freedom. Freedom. You're free to be the biggest screw-up you want to be. But you're not free from the consequences of that. You're free to be the greatest power for good that you can be. And you're not free from the consequences of that either. We are always responsible for our consequences. But we are also always free. So I would say, look at that and say, what's bothering me? Is it really their behavior? Or is it how, as I see it sometimes, and I'm not saying this for you, but sometimes it's what bothers me is I think they're reflecting me. Sometimes when you're a parent, your kids act up, you're really upset because they're proving you're a bad parent, which you've always suspected. And only secondarily is your concern about them. You see? Stop. Do it this way. That's all we need to do. Well, I hope you've had fun. This was our Q&A time. And